Welcome to Fearful Frequencies, where every story is a signal from the shadows. Tune in if you dare, and let the whispers of the unknown send chills down your spine. But beware, once you hear the haunting echoes of these tales, you may never listen to the silence the same way again. If you enjoy these stories, consider subscribing on Patreon at www.patreon.com/fearfulfrequencies. Link in description. So, in the dead of night, when the world is silent and shadows grow long, there are frequencies that tap into our deepest fears. Gather yourself and listen. This story is called The Real Zodiac Killer. Elliot Brandt was born into a world of quiet order. His parents, professors at a small New England liberal arts college, instilled in him a love for knowledge, but it was the puzzles they gave him as a child that shaped his mind. While other children spent their summers riding bikes and playing baseball, Elliot sat on the floor of his bedroom, meticulously assembling intricate jigsaw puzzles or decoding simple ciphers from books his father brought home. The patterns made sense in a way the rest of the world didn't. His intelligence, though impressive, came at a cost. He struggled to connect with his peers, his tendency to overanalyze and his near-obsessive focus on logic alienating him from more carefree children. His mother worried about his isolation, gently encouraging him to join group activities. But Elliot resisted. Puzzles were his companions, their silent challenges infinitely preferable to the unpredictable nature of human relationships. By the time he reached high school, Elliot was a prodigy. He excelled in mathematics and computer science, winning statewide cryptography competitions and earning scholarships to prestigious universities. His career path seemed inevitable. Elliot would work with codes, patterns, and logic far removed from the messy unpredictability of the world. As an adult, Elliot's life unfolded almost exactly as he had planned. He became a cryptographer for a private cybersecurity firm, earning accolades for his precision and brilliance. He was content, or at least convinced himself he was. His days followed a predictable rhythm, his evenings spent solving puzzles or reading esoteric texts on encryption and mathematics. Yet there was one aspect of his life that defied his control: Claire. Claire entered Elliot's life during a cryptography seminar at a Boston university. A linguist specializing in ancient texts, she was as passionate about decoding as he was, though her perspective was different. Where Elliot saw puzzles as challenges to be solved, Claire viewed them as windows into the past, glimpses of the people and cultures that created them. Their shared love of symbols and codes quickly drew them together, and for a time they were inseparable. But their relationship was not without its challenges. Elliot's inability to connect emotionally frustrated Claire, who longed for something deeper than intellectual sparring. Their evenings, though stimulating, revolved around Elliot's work, his focus rarely straying from the codes in front of him. Eventually, the relationship fractured under the weight of his obsession, leaving Elliot with only the memory of their shared moments and the ache of her absence. It was this emptiness that made Elliot vulnerable when Detective Ryan Torres handed him the Zodiac cipher fragment. Torres had always known Elliot was brilliant. They had attended college together, where Elliot's uncanny ability to see patterns in chaos earned him the nickname The Machine. After joining the police force, Torres often joked that if Elliot ever wanted to ditch his cushy cybersecurity job, there was a place for him in law enforcement. When the Zodiac cipher fragment resurfaced in an evidence locker during a routine inventory, Torres immediately thought of Elliot. "This came out of nowhere," Torres said over lunch, sliding the photocopied page across the table. "The original case notes suggest it might have been sent to the press, but never published. Could be nothing, but I figured you'd enjoy taking a crack at it." Elliot recognized the Zodiac's distinctive style immediately. The chaotic arrangement of letters, numbers, and symbols was unmistakable. Yet, something about this fragment felt different. The symbols were more refined, with certain characters bearing ornamental flourishes he didn't recall seeing in the confirmed ciphers. It was almost as if the Zodiac's hand had been guided by something, or someone else. Torres leaned in, lowering his voice. Look, between you and me, this case haunts the department. Decades of dead ends, theories, and conspiracy nuts. If there's even the slightest chance you can make sense of this. Elliot nodded, though he wasn't sure why. At first, he approached the cipher as a curiosity, a distraction from his daily work. But the more he studied it, the more engrossed he became. Nights bled into mornings as he isolated patterns, cross-referenced symbols, and tested encryption algorithms. His progress was slow but steady, revealing fragments of meaning buried beneath the chaos. Claire entered the equation after a particularly unsettling discovery. While mapping the cipher's symbols against various decryption models, Elliot noticed clusters that seemed to correlate with astronomical coordinates. Intrigued, he overlaid the symbols onto a star chart and was shocked to find that they aligned with specific celestial events. A full moon, a solar eclipse, and the positions of certain constellations on the dates of the Zodiac's confirmed murders. He called Claire immediately. "You're telling me the Zodiac was into astrology?" Claire's voice was skeptical, though Elliot could hear the curiosity beneath it. "Not astrology," Elliot corrected. "Astronomy. These symbols, they correspond to star charts, and not just random ones. The alignments are precise, Claire. Too precise to be a coincidence." Claire agreed to meet him the next day, bringing along her reference materials on ancient symbols and celestial lore. Together they pored over the cipher, uncovering connections that defied explanation. Several glyphs matched planetary sigils used in medieval alchemy, while others mirrored runes associated with chaos and death in Norse mythology. One particularly unsettling cluster resembled the symbol for Algol, the demon star, long associated with violence and misfortune. "The Zodiac wasn't just playing games," Claire said, her voice tinged with unease. "He was invoking something." Claire's suggestion lingered in Elliot's mind long after she left. Invoking something? The idea seemed absurd, but the evidence was undeniable. The symbols in the cipher weren't random. They were tied to ancient cosmology and myth. As Elliot delved deeper, he became increasingly convinced that the Zodiac wasn't just a man with a penchant for murder. He was part of something far larger, something that stretched across time and space. Elliot's obsession grew. He spent days poring over medieval grimoires, alchemical texts, and obscure astronomical manuscripts, searching for any mention of patterns similar to the cipher. One night he stumbled upon a passage in a 17th century treatise on occult astrology. "The stars are not fixed but alive, their patterns ever-changing. To read them is to invite their gaze upon you." The words sent a shiver down his spine. Could the Zodiac have believed he was communicating with the stars, or worse, that the stars were communicating through him? Elliot shared his findings with Claire and Torres, who had begun following his progress closely. "If what you're saying is true," Torres said during one of their late-night calls, "this isn't just about solving a case anymore. It's about understanding what the hell we're dealing with." But Elliot's discoveries only deepened the mystery. Buried within the cipher was a set of coordinates pointing to a remote location in the Sierra Nevada mountains. The site, when overlaid with a star chart, aligned perfectly with the position of the constellation Serpens on a specific date, one that hadn't yet occurred. Despite Claire and Torres's protests, Elliot felt compelled to visit the site. The drive was long and grueling, the winding mountain roads shrouded in fog. As he neared the coordinates, an unnatural stillness descended. The usual sounds of the forest, birdsong, rustling leaves, were absent, replaced by a heavy silence that seemed to press against his chest. The clearing was small and unremarkable, save for the circle of stones at its center. Each stone bore an engraved symbol from the cipher, their surfaces weathered but intact. In the middle of the circle sat a metal box, its edges corroded with age. Elliot hesitated before opening it, his hands trembling as he lifted the lid. Inside, he found a journal. Its pages were filled with frantic handwriting, sketches of zodiac symbols intertwined with star charts, and rambling passages about the Watcher in the sky and the blood calendar. One entry stood out. The stars are not ours to command. They command us. The pattern reads us as we read it. As Elliot read, the air around him grew heavy, vibrating with a low hum that seemed to emanate from the ground itself. The symbols on the stones began to glow faintly, their light pulsating in rhythm with the hum. Shadows flickered at the edges of the clearing, coalescing into shapes that defied explanation. Panicked, Elliot fled, abandoning the journal and box. But the hum followed him, growing louder and more oppressive with each step. By the time he reached his car, it had become a deafening roar, a cacophony of voices speaking in the incomprehensible language from his dreams. The drive home was a blur. Elliot gripped the steering wheel tightly, his heart pounding as the hum echoed in his mind. By the time he reached his apartment, he was drenched in sweat, his thoughts fractured and disjointed. He tried to rationalize what had happened, telling himself it was stress or an auditory hallucination. But deep down, he knew better. In the days that followed, Elliot's life spiraled out of control. The hum never left him, a constant presence that seemed to seep into his very being. He stopped sleeping, his nights filled with vivid nightmares of twisting constellations and glowing symbols. The voice from his dream returned, louder and more insistent. "You are part of the pattern. You always were." Claire visited him once, horrified by what she saw. His apartment was unrecognizable, the walls covered in scrawled symbols and equations, star charts pinned haphazardly to every surface. "Elliot, this isn't research anymore. It's madness," she said, her voice shaking. "You need to stop before it consumes you." But Elliot couldn't stop. The cipher had taken hold of him, its symbols etched into his mind. He became convinced that the Zodiac hadn't acted alone, that he had been guided by something far older, something that used him as a vessel to inscribe its will upon the world. Dr. Richard Hawthorne, the symbologist Claire had consulted earlier, attempted to intervene. "Elliot," he said during a desperate phone call, "this isn't a cipher. It's a contagion. The Zodiac wasn't creating it, he was channeling it. And now so are you." Elliot ignored Hawthorne's warnings, though they haunted him. The idea that the cipher was alive, that it was using him as it had used the Zodiac, seemed both ludicrous and terrifyingly plausible. He began to see the symbols everywhere, in the cracks of the sidewalk, in the static of his television, even in the arrangement of the stars when he gazed out his window. One night, Elliot disappeared. Torres was the first to notice, arriving at his apartment after repeated calls went unanswered. The sight that greeted him was unsettling. The walls were covered in symbols that seemed to shift when viewed too long, their lines twisting and writhing like living things. On Elliot's desk sat a single sheet of paper, its surface filled with a new cipher, one far more complex and incomprehensible than the last. Claire and Hawthorne arrived shortly after, both visibly shaken by the scene. "This isn't just madness," Hawthorne said, running his fingers over the symbols. "It's an evolution. The pattern is growing." The new cipher was sealed away, locked in a secure facility where no one could access it. But its influence continued to spread. The symbols began to appear in unexpected places, scrawled on subway walls, embedded in graffiti, and whispered in the darkest corners of the internet. Those who studied them reported vivid nightmares, auditory hallucinations, and an unshakable sense of dread. The Zodiac's legacy was no longer confined to his crimes. It had become something far greater, a living pattern, a cosmic riddle infecting all who dared to look too closely. And somewhere beneath the infinite expanse of the night sky, the pattern waited, its reach extending ever further.